At the beginning of the 20th century, there were just under 30 Bathurst diocesan priests. Most were from Ireland, including John O'Dowd, Michael Heath, John Brophy, John McAuliffe, John Barry, John Hanley, James Ryan and Walter Curran. One of the few Australians was Edward Gell, son of cathedral architect Edward Gell and his wife Elizabeth Hazel. Some had been trained in Bishop Quinn's Diocesan Seminary, Charles Borromeo in Bathurst, including John O'Farrell, Dennis O'Kennedy, Patrick Doran, Martin Long, Thomas Doran, Edward Flanagan and John Milne Curran. Almost all did their first years moving around the more remote centres before being appointed as parish priest. James O'Donnell was 16 years at Hill End. Quote, he led a nomadic life, always on horseback. Dennis O'Kennedy, ordained in 1880 by Bishop Quinn, said his first Mass on his first Christmas Day in Rydal, his second in Hazel Grove and his third at O'Connell. Stanislaus McGee was born and educated in India. He was in the Bathurst Diocese from 1889 to 1918. He was known for his tales of the early days, travelling over vast plains through the bush, on horseback, sleeping under the stars with a saddle for a pillow, saying Mass on a rock. Buildings for the Catholic Church had also been made before 1900 at Browns Creek, Uwarbury, Gulgong, Campbell Creek and Tallawang. And Baker's Swamp, Wongarban, Gilgooma, Eucarina, Turawina, North Dubbo, Portland, Yeovil, Wallerawang. Once appointed parish priest, it appears to have been the custom to stay there for a very long time. This was the era of continued expansion and building for the church, and most priests who stayed in the one place for the last years of their life contributed in this manner. Their names are engraved in the church's building history. Builders included James Kelly, 21 years in Carcow, Edmund O'Donnell, 31 years in Dubbo, John O'Farrell, 58 years in Canamble, Martin Long, 17 years in Gulgong and almost 25 in Wellington, and John O'Donovan became parish priest of Mudgee in 1868 and stayed there until his death in 1912. William Gallagher, ordained in Ireland as World War I began, served in the trenches where he was gassed and wounded. He earned the French Croix de Guerre. He came to Australia in 1921, serving mainly in the Wilcannia diocese, but retired to Darby's Falls, where he was well known as the fisherman, pursuing his angling interest, as well as ministering to the local community. Cecil Lonrigan, educated by the Mercy Sisters in Mudgee, also served in France for 2 years as a chaplain in World War I. On his return, he went to Coonabarabran and then Canowindra. Two priests from this time were to make their names in the wider world in scientific endeavours. Joseph Slattery was a Vincentian teacher at St Stanislaus from 1888 to 1911. He is celebrated for his earlier work on X-rays, and in 1904 he made one of the first overland radio transmissions in Australia, from St Stanislaus College to the Cathedral Tower. One of the first students of St Charles' Seminary was John Milne Curran. Father Julian Tennyson Woods gave a mission there, and his interest in geology captured John Curran's attention. By 1902, Father Curran was appointed government geologist. Recognition must be given to Edward Flanagan for his contribution to the telling of the diocesan history. From 1912 to 1957, Father Flanagan was in Mudgee. He came as a child to Australia and he lived until he was 94. His memoirs are invaluable. John Mary Dunn arrived in Australia as a newly ordained Irish priest for the Bathurst Diocese in 1871. He spent time in the more remote parishes before he was appointed to Dubbo and then Bathurst. Bishop Dunn was renowned as a builder of churches, schools, convents and presbyteries, and one of his most impressive edifices was the Bishop's House in Keppel Street. In Bathurst, Bishop Dunn oversaw the building of the Patrician Brothers School, the Cathedral Sanctuary, the Novitiate Chapel, St Joseph's Orphanage and additions to St Stanislaus College. Plans for a mortuary chapel were drawn up in 1901 and the building was completed in the Catholic portion of the Bathurst Cemetery. The 5-yearly report filled in by Bishop Dunn in 1906 is the quinquennial to the Vatican, which still continues today. This Bishop of the Rosary, as he was known, wrote many pencilled sermons and addresses in a small notebook. On education, he wrote, "The immediate object of education is the improvement of those taught, and the secondary end is the good that accrues to others who have a claim on our services, while the ultimate end of all instruction is the service of God on earth and our everlasting happiness hereafter." Priests of the diocese had by now been appointed as inspectors of schools, and an annual report was given to the bishop on the schools of each parish. There were further changes to the boundaries of the diocese towards the end of Bishop Dunn's reign. Dr. Dunn died August 1919. Michael O'Farrell was a Vincentian, an academic, and served, originally in Australia, as spiritual director at St Columba's and St Patrick's seminaries. He was made the 4th Bishop of Bathurst in 1920 and served less than 8 years before he died. These are among the few churches he saw built in his brief episcopacy. Bishop O'Farrell was very quickly engaged in what became the major work of his 8 years, namely the establishment of the Catholic hospital on the site of Bathurst's Hathrop. Changes to the Real Property Act made time-consuming demands on Bishop O'Farrell. 1924 to 1925 involved him in numerous letters to and from solicitors. Australian Prime Minister Mr. Bruce signed the letter of introduction for the bishop in 1925 before he visited Europe, including Rome in 1926. His death occurred on the 3rd of April 1928. John Francis Norton was bishop from 1926 to 1963. For the first 18 months, he was coadjutor to Bishop O'Farrell, and for the remainder of that extraordinary time, he was the Bishop of Bathurst in his own right. As a dedication to Bishop O'Farrell, Bishop Norton established the Boys' Home at Crowpatrick in Orange. Beginning just a few years into Bishop Norton's episcopacy, the Great Depression affected the lives of all Australians, and the Catholics of the Bathurst Diocese were not spared. To bring consolation to them, churches, however humble, were built for their gathering together to worship. for just a few years before and after 1930, the record, the diocesan paper begun by Bishop Quinn, was printed again. Its pages show something of the buildings and life of the Catholic diocese at that time. The Catholic Church in the Bathurst Diocese was involved in many ways in the issues associated with World War II. For example, chaplains had to be found for and assigned to internees' camps. Individual priests wanted to serve as chaplains in the war zones. Official documents were addressed to governments of the day on matters such as preventing Catholic school buildings from being used for military purposes. And there were personal letters of wartime involvement to and from the diocese and the bishop. More churches and chapels of ease were erected following the war. At Glen Davis, Umungery, Kerrs Creek, Kapiti, South Dubbo, Fashions Mount, Bathurst's Assumption, the Lagoon, Gormans Hill, Ballymore, Nilerex, Barradine, Coonabarabran, Brisbane Valley. Ben Chifley, a Bathurst boy who became Prime Minister, was buried from the Cathedral of St Michael and John in 1951. Public exhibition of Catholic devotion throughout Australia was encouraged in the years following the war. The Legion of Mary for laymen and women, the Children of Mary, the Sodality of the Sacred Heart, and the Holy Name Society were all devotional groups until the early 1960s. Hibernian society was a little like the service groups in the wider community of today, and they set up health funds for those in need. The Catholic Women's League, Catholic Youth League, and Catholic Young Men's Society were other church organisations which took spirituality to the wider community. The St Vincent de Paul Society helped, and still helps today, in charitable ways. The apparition of Mary to the 3 children at Fatima in Portugal in 1916 had significant and far-reaching effects on the faithful of Australia. A statue was designed to honour Our Lady of Fatima, or Our Lady of the Rosary, and it went on pilgrimage throughout the world, and included were Australia and Bathurst in 1951. Processions for this and various sodalities and important celebrations were part of this chapter of Catholic devotion. A strongly patriotic Irish bishop and many priests of the diocese, also from Ireland, ensured that St Patrick's Day was an annual celebration. In Ireland in 1958, Bishop Norton was given an honorary degree of the National University of Ireland and honoured with the Freedom of the City of Dublin. Lourdes House for the Aged in Dubbo was one of the major innovations of the diocese as 1960 approached. Bishop Norton wrote diary details of his episcopal work in each year's Australian Catholic Directory. 1957 Directory gives us a particularly comprehensive look at the diocese, as well as the marginalised Catholic population details in Bishop Norton's hands.